The next function is, what is the role of plasma proteins in regulation of pH? We'll see the normal blood pH is 7.4. Whenever there is fall in pH, what do you mean by fall in pH? Increased hydrogen ion concentration in the blood will result in fall in pH. This can happen during acidosis. So consider a patient with diabetes mellitus. The diabetic state is in uncontrolled state. So when the diabetic state is uncontrolled, the ketone bodies production is increased. The ketone bodies are keto acids. There is increased ketone body production and increased in the ketones in the plasma. We call it as diabetic ketoacidosis. So in this diabetic ketoacidosis, the hydrogen ion concentration in the plasma is increased and the pH is reduced. So it is an acidic state. So what is the role of plasma proteins in regulation of this pH or bringing back this hydrogen ions to normal so that the pH is brought back within the normal state? So these plasma proteins acts as buffers. The plasma proteins acts as buffers. Whenever there is free hydrogen ion concentration is increased in the plasma, this plasma protein will pick up the hydrogen ions from the plasma, thereby reducing the free hydrogen ions in the plasma so that the pH is brought within the normal range. We'll see how the plasma proteins acts as a buffer. See, this is the normal structure of a plasma protein amino acid. This is the structure of an amino acid in the plasma protein. So in the solution, the plasma proteins are the amino acids exist in zwitterion state, that is in solution. So that means this is the zwitterion state, ionic state COO minus, and here NH3 plus. So this is the structure of the amino acid or the plasma protein monomer. One side is the amino terminal, the other side is the carboxy terminal. In solution, the amino acids are in charged state, so we call it as zwitterion state. So it is NH3 plus on one side, COO minus on the other side. So now what happens if there is increase in the plasma hydrogen ion concentrations? These hydrogen ions will be picked up by these proteins. This H plus will be picked up by the protein and this binds to the COO minus group. So thereby the free hydrogen ions are reduced. So now what happens to the amino acid? So this will be NH3 plus, this is CH, and here by picking up of hydrogen ions from the plasma, this will be converted into COOH. So what happens to the free hydrogen ions? The free hydrogen ions are reduced. So when there is increase in the free hydrogen ions in the plasma, they are reduced by picking up from the amino acids. So these amino acids, which are the component of the proteins, are buffers. So that will resist the change in the pH by either picking up the hydrogen ions when there is increased hydrogen ion concentration, and whenever there is decreased hydrogen ion concentration in the plasma, the pH is alkaline, the pH is more. So what happens when there is in alkaline situation? These will give the hydrogen ions from this NH3 plus terminal. So from the NH3 plus terminal, it will release the hydrogen ions into the plasma, thereby this decreased hydrogen ions are brought back to normal. So now we'll see how this will release and what will be the structure after it is releasing the hydrogen ions. So I'll write it here. So NH3, after giving one hydrogen ion, it will become NH2, and this will be the structure of an protein monomer. So when one hydrogen ion is released from the amino acid. So this happens during alkaline situations where pH is increased or hydrogen ions in the plasma are released. These proteins will give the hydrogen ions from the protein to the plasma, thereby increasing the hydrogen ions concentration, thereby bringing the pH to normal. So by the buffering action of the amino acids or the proteins, they act in regulation of acid-base balance or the pH of the plasma. The next function of plasma protein is to transport the substances. So how the substances are transported from one region to the other region in the body. They are transported through the circulation. So the substances are picked, they are bound to the plasmaproteins in the circulation, and this plasmaprotein acts as a vehicle in transporting the substance from the site of its origin towards its site of action. We'll give some examples like the carbon dioxide is an end product of metabolism. The carbon dioxide are synthesized from the released from the cells. The cells utilize the oxygen for its metabolic activity and release carbon dioxide. So now how this carbon dioxide is eliminated from the body? So carbon dioxide will enter the capillaries. This carbon dioxide in the capillary will bind to the plasma proteins and they form carbamino compounds, and this carbon dioxide along with the plasma protein in circulation is carried to the lungs, and from the lungs it is released to the atmosphere. So how carbon dioxide is transported in the blood is bound to plasma protein, carbamino, forming carbamino compound. There are other ways of transport of carbon dioxide also, but this is one way. So the role of plasma protein in transport of gases like carbon dioxide. Plasma proteins also can transport various hormones. These hormones are synthesized from endocrine glands. So we'll give an example. The thyroid gland will secrete thyroxine or triiodothyronine. So these are the thyroid hormones. They are synthesized and secreted from the thyroid gland. So this will enter the circulation. This will enter the circulation. In the circulation, they bind to either albumin plasma protein or globulin plasma protein, and they are transported in the circulation along with binding to the albumin or globulin. So these plasma proteins will bind to the substance and they carry the substance from the site of origin towards the target tissues. So here the target tissue can be any of the cells. So it will reach the target tissue and the hormones can act on those target tissues. So in the circulation, the hormones are transported by binding to albumin or globulins. See, the liver will synthesize some substances and those substances have to be transported. We'll consider the liver will synthesize triglycerides or phospholipids or cholesterol. So how these substances, the fatty tissues, are transported in the blood and they are getting deposited in the tissues. So there is a plasma protein, we call it as low density lipoprotein. Plasma protein, low density lipoprotein is a type of plasma protein. Mainly it is globulin. This will bind to the triglycerides, phospholipids and cholesterol. Binding to this, all these substances can be carried from the liver through the blood. It will reach the tissues and in the tissues it gets deposited. Like in adipose tissue, the fat content is deposited in the adipose tissue. Those fat content is mainly they are from the liver, they are synthesized and they are transported through the blood and they are reaching the cells. One more example is within the spleen, the RBCs are destroyed after their 120 days of lifespan. After the destruction of RBCs, they release hemoglobin and heme is metabolized to produce bilirubin. This bilirubin is a very toxic substance that has to be conjugated and detoxified. That happens in the liver. But how this bilirubin from the spleen is reaching the liver is by passing through the circulation in bound form. So this bilirubin has to be bound with the albumin, and this albumin plasma protein acts as a vehicle in carrying the bilirubin from the reticuloendothelial system of the spleen to the liver. So this bilirubin will reach the liver through the circulation by binding to albumin. So this through the capillaries can reach the liver. So this liver will pick up the bilirubin and it is conjugated. Now we will summarize what are the different substances that are transported and which is the plasma protein transporting the substances. Albumin, the plasma protein, is mainly transporting the bilirubin It will transport the free fatty acids, and also it transports copper, calcium, metals. It also transports thyroxine. So the transport of thyroxine is by binding to thyroxine binding prealbumin, thyroxine binding prealbumin. It is also called transthyretin. TBPA is also called transthyretin. Albumin also transports certain drugs like aspirin. So these are the different substances that are bound to albumin and they are transported. Bilirubin, free fatty acids, some metals, copper and calcium, hormones, thyroxine, and also steroid hormones, and certain drugs. So these are all transported by binding to albumin. Now let us see what are the different substances that are transported by binding to different types of globulins. Now let us see what are the different globulins which acts as a carrier protein. Haptoglobin is a type of globulin which will bind to the free hemoglobin in the circulation and it transports the free hemoglobin. Hemopexin is a type of globulin which will bind to the free heme. The heme is a degraded product of hemoglobin, will be bound to the hemopexin and it is transported. Ceruloplasmin, a type of plasma protein globulin, this will transport or bind to copper. Transferrin, it's a type of globulin, will transport iron. Now, thyroxine binding globulin, thyroxine binding globulin, TBG. TBG refers to thyroxine binding globulin. It's a type of plasma protein, comes under globulin group. So this will bind to hormone thyroxine, thyroid hormone, and this thyroid hormone is transported in circulation bound to TBG. Cortisol binding globulin, cortisol binding globulin, also called transcortin. So this transcortin is a type of globulin which will bind to the cortisol hormone and this cortisol hormone is transported in the plasma. 7. High density lipoprotein. It's a type of globulin which will transport the lipids like triglycerides, cholesterol from the tissues to the liver and they are excreted from the body. So how cholesterol is transported from the tissues to the liver and from the liver through the bile it is excreted from the body is by transport of cholesterol binding to the high density lipoprotein. So this high density lipoprotein will reduce the cholesterol content in the body. This is a HDL is a good cholesterol. Binding of cholesterol to HDL, this HDL takes up the cholesterol from the different tissues to the liver. From the liver, the cholesterol is eliminated from the body through secreting into the bile. Low density lipoprotein and very low density lipoprotein. So this low density lipoprotein and very low density lipoproteins will bind to the lipids like triglycerides, phospholipids and cholesterols, and these are transported from the liver to the site of deposition into the tissues. So low density, very low density lipoproteins will transport the fat content from the liver to the tissues, and these lipids are getting deposited in the tissues. So LDL is a bad cholesterol. The cholesterol bound to LDL is transported from the liver to the site of deposition, and the cholesterol in the body gets accumulated. So LDL, very low density, these two lipoproteins are transporting the cholesterol from the liver to the site of deposition. Next function of plasma protein is the role of plasma proteins in body defense mechanism. So whenever a disease causing microorganism enters our body, what is the role of plasma protein in eliminating this disease causing microorganism? Consider a bacteria has entered our body, how plasma protein will kill that bacteria. Is there any plasma protein killing the bacteria? Yes, the antibodies are plasma proteins. They come under GABA globulins. Antibodies are gamma globulins or immunoglobulins. They will attack the bacteria or any microorganisms and they kill the microorganisms. So we explain this under humoral immunity. The role of antibodies in humoral immunity and how these antibodies will attack the organism, and this organism is killed or it is neutralized or it is suppressed. This antibodies role in killing, neutralizing or suppressing the organism. And this, what are these antibodies? They are gamma globulins, and these antibodies, gamma globulins, are the only plasma proteins that are synthesized or secreted from the B lymphocytes or B cells. The rest all plasma proteins are synthesized from the liver. The next function of plasma proteins is the role of plasma proteins in hemostasis. What do you mean by this? Hemostasis is nothing but arrest of bleeding. Whenever there is any injury to blood vessel, injury to the blood starts oozing out. So this is bleeding. Now there are certain plasma proteins, we call them as coagulation factors or coagulation proteins, and also the fibrinogen plasma protein. So these come in role, they form a clot. And they plug the site of injury. So what happens now? The bleeding is stopped. There is no more bleeding. So this clot is because of activation of clotting factors, and they form a meshwork, and this meshwork will cover the site of injury, and this meshwork will prevent further blood loss. So the fibrinogen is a coagulation factor, and that is one of the plasma proteins. So the role of plasma protein is to prevent bleeding. We call it as hemostasis or stoppage of bleeding. The next function of plasma protein is the role of plasma proteins in contribution to the viscosity of the blood. We know the blood is more thick or water is more thick. Blood is more thick, right? So blood is more thick than the water. The viscosity of blood is 4 to 5 times more than water. Why blood is more thick? Why it is so thick? Because of presence of one, plasma proteins, and two is the cells. So the plasma proteins will contribute to the viscosity of the blood. Mainly it is contributed by fibrinogen. Fibrinogen, though it is smaller in content, but it is heavy. The molecular weight of fibrinogen is more. So this accounts to the density and the viscosity of the blood. And also the fibrinogen contributing to the viscosity of the blood. If the blood is more viscous, it exerts more resistance. So the blood pressure exerted on the wall of the vessel is also more. So the blood flowing will exert more and more pressure on the wall if the blood flowing is more thick. If the water is flowing, the water flow will be of low resistance, it will flow very quickly. So water movement is very quick. So the pressure exerted by the water molecules on the wall will be less. This is less, and here the pressure exerted by the blood is more. So this is because of the more viscosity of the blood, and there is more shearing resistance between the blood and the wall, and it exerts more pressure. So this is one of the function of plasma protein, is to exert pressures on the wall of the vessels, so that the more and more blood can come out of the capillaries and they can provide nutrition to the tissues. The blood pressure can also be regulated by a substance, the plasma protein, angiotensinogen. So this is a type of globulin, angiotensinogen, and this is a precursor for angiotensin 2. Angiotensin 2. So whenever there is fall in blood pressures, when there fall in blood pressure, there will be more and more conversion of angiotensinogen plasma protein into angiotensin 2, and this angiotensin 2 causes vasoconstriction. So if this is a blood vessel, because of the action of the angiotensin 2, what happens? There is vasoconstriction. That means the lumen decreases. So this is vasoconstricted, the lumen decreases. When the lumen decreases, more and more pressure will be exerted on the wall of the blood vessels by the blood flowing through this. So angiotensin 2 is a most potent vasoconstrictor. By constricting the blood vessels, the blood can exert more and more pressures. So thereby the blood pressure is brought back to normal when there is a fall in blood pressures. Plasma proteins will act as reserve proteins. So during fasting, during starvation, when you're not consuming any food, and when there is decrease in protein intake, these proteins which are in blood can be taken up by the tissues for their needs. So consider this is the blood vessel. Plasma proteins are there: albumin, globulin, fibrinogen, and this mainly this albumin is nutritionally complete protein. That means this albumin will have almost all the essential amino acids. So during decreased protein intake, or during starvation or fasting, the cells can pick up this albumin, and they can utilize this albumin for the protein synthesis and the metabolic activities of the cells. Now we'll summarize the different functions of plasma proteins. 1. Plasma proteins exerts colloidal osmotic pressure. This is mainly by albumin. 2. Plasma protein role in regulation of pH, or plasma proteins will act as a buffer, that is mainly the albumin. Third, plasma proteins are transporting various substances like gases, mainly carbon dioxide, and many hormones are transported. Metabolic waste products, mainly bilirubin. Metals like copper and calcium are transported, binding to plasma protein. Drugs, various drugs are transported by binding to plasma proteins. Fourth, role in body defense mechanism. This is mainly by gamma globulins. Gamma globulins have role in body defense mechanism and humoral immunity. Fifth, role of plasma proteins in blood coagulation, formation of blood clot, and stoppage of bleeding. That is the role of mainly the clotting factors and fibrinogen. Sixth, plasma protein contributing to the viscosity of the blood and contributing to the blood pressure, mainly fibrinogen plasma protein. 8. Plasma proteins acts as reserve proteins during decreased protein intake or during starvation, mainly albumin. Human albumin is a good reserve protein because it contains all the essential amino acids and it is nutritionally complete protein. Thank you. Thanks for watching. We'll meet in the next lecture.